Manchester City did not drop 2 points tonight. They revealed that the architecture of their dominance has structural cracks that no amount of tactical adjustment can repair. This was not a stumble. This was a warning letter about what happens next. Core analysis. There is a specific moment in the life cycle of every dominant sporting institution when the gap between perception and reality becomes impossible to ignore. The perception lingers because memories are long, because past achievements cast long shadows, because it takes time for observers to accept that what was once exceptional has become ordinary. Manchester City have arrived at this moment, not through one match, not through one result, but through an accumulation of evidence that this draw against Brighton merely confirmed in the starkest possible terms. The warning sign embedded in this result is not about form. Form fluctuates. Form can be restored through rest, through tactical tweaking, through the return of injured players. The warning sign is about something more fundamental. It is about the erosion of the competitive advantages that separated Manchester City from the rest of English football for the better part of a decade. Those advantages were not simply financial. They were not simply about having the best manager in the world. They were about the intersection of multiple factors that created a self-reinforcing system of excellence. That system is now fragmenting, and this match provided a window into exactly how. Consider what Brighton represent in the current landscape of English football. This is a club built on principles, on a clear identity, on a recruitment model that prioritizes profile over reputation, on a coaching philosophy that trusts young managers to implement sophisticated tactical frameworks. Brighton are not an accident, they are a project that has now matured to the point where visiting the Etihad Stadium carries no psychological burden whatsoever. They do not arrive hopping to survive, they arrive expecting to compete. This expectation is based on an accurate assessment of where they stand relative to their opponents, and that assessment, even 2 years ago, would have been considered delusional. Warning for Manchester City is not that Brighton played well. The warning is that Brighton's level of performance at the Etihad has become normalized. The warning is that the gap which once existed between City and clubs of Brighton's profile has narrowed to the point of near invisibility. The warning is that the gravitational pull that used to draw elite players to Manchester, that used to make the Etihad a fortress, that used to generate an aura of inevitability around City's results has weakened. And once aura weakens, it rarely strengthens again. Let us examine the structural factors that underpin this warning. First, there is the question of squad construction. Manchester City's squad was built for a specific type of football, a type that demanded certain physical and technical profiles, a type that required players to understand their roles within an intricate positional framework. This squad is aging, not catastrophically, not universally, but in key positions where the demands are highest. And the replacements that have been brought in have not seamlessly integrated into the system. This is not a criticism of the recruitment. It is an acknowledgement that replacing components within a complex machine is harder than it appears, especially when that machine was built by a singular vision over nearly a decade. Second, there is the question of motivation. This is delicate terrain. Nobody questions the professionalism of Manchester City's players. Nobody suggests they do not try. But there is a difference between trying and burning, between effort and desperation, between wanting to win and needing to win. A squad that has won everything multiple times faces a specific psychological challenge. The hunger that drove their initial success becomes harder to locate. The standards that were once non-negotiable become subject to negotiation. The intensity that used to be automatic now requires conscious summoning. This is human nature. It affects every dynasty eventually, and there were moments in this match where City's intensity felt manufactured rather than organic. Third, there is the question of tactical evolution. Football does not stand still, it adapts, it learns, it develops countermeasures. Manchester City's methodology was revolutionary when it was introduced to the Premier League, but revolutions become orthodoxies, and orthodoxies get solved. The rest of the league has spent years studying City's patterns, preparing for City's movements, developing strategies to neutralize City's strengths. Meanwhile, City themselves have evolved incrementally rather than fundamentally. The basic framework remains the same. The principles remain the same. The solutions to problems remain drawn from the same palette. Against a team like Brighton, coached by someone steeped in modern tactical thinking, this lack of evolution becomes exposure. Brighton's approach tonight was instructive. They did not sit deep and absorb pressure hopping for a fortunate break. That was the old template for visiting the Etihad, the template of fear. Brighton abandoned that template entirely. They pressed high when opportunities arose. They maintained their possession principles even in dangerous areas of the pitch. They trusted their technique in tight spaces. They treated Manchester City as equals. And here is the critical point: City could not punish them for this audacity. In previous seasons, treating City as equals was punished ruthlessly. The arrogance of competing toe-to-toe with the champions was exposed within minutes. That punishment mechanism has malfunctioned, and every opponent in the league is watching. Every opponent is recalibrating their approach. Every opponent is realizing that the Etihad is no longer a place where ambition goes to die. The hidden dimension of this warning concerns the market for elite players. Manchester City's ability to attract the best players in the world was predicated on the guarantee of trophies, on the assurance of playing in a team that would compete for everything every season, on the promise of working with a manager who would maximize their abilities. These guarantees are weakening. The assurance is less certain. The promise carries asterisks. When City enter the market for elite targets, they will now face questions they did not face before. Questions about trajectory, questions about squad balance, questions about whether the best years of the project have already passed. These questions did not exist 12 months ago, they exist now, and their existence will shape City's ability to rebuild. There is also the question of what this warning means for the competitive structure of the Premier League itself. For years, the conversation centered on how to catch Manchester City, how to bridge the gap, how to compete with a club that seemed to operate on a different plane. That conversation is changing. It is no longer about catching City. It is about capitalizing on City's vulnerability before they can restore themselves. Arsenal, Liverpool, and others are not chasing a dominant force anymore. They are competing with a wounded one. This changes everything. It changes the psychological dynamics. It changes the strategic calculations. It changes the sense of what is possible. Manchester City's response to this warning will define the next chapter of their history. They can treat it as a temporary dip, as a blip caused by specific circumstances that will correct themselves naturally. This would be the comfortable interpretation, the interpretation that requires no fundamental reassessment, the interpretation that allows everyone associated with the club to sleep easily. Alternatively, they can treat it as a genuine inflection point, as evidence that significant change is required, that the methods which produced past success cannot simply be repeated with the expectation of identical outcomes. This interpretation is uncomfortable. It demands honesty. It requires acknowledging that something precious is slipping away. The historical record suggests that most dominant institutions choose the comfortable interpretation for too long. They believe in their own mythology. They trust that what worked before will work again. They attribute decline to bad luck rather than structural factors. By the time they accept the need for fundamental change, the window for that change has narrowed significantly. Manchester United spent a decade in this trap after Ferguson's departure, the belief that the name alone would be sufficient, that the history would intimidate opponents, that the natural order would reassert itself. It did not. The natural order had already shifted. United were simply the last to notice. Manchester City are not Manchester United. Their situations are not identical, but the warning embedded in this Brighton result echoes warnings that United ignored a decade ago. The warning that dominance is not permanent, that advantages erode, that competitors adapt, that players age, that motivation diminishes, that tactical frameworks become predictable, that aura fades. These are universal truths that apply to every sporting dynasty. City believed they might be exempt from these truths. This season is teaching them otherwise. What makes Brighton's performance particularly significant is the nature of their challenge. They did not rely on physicality to disrupt City's rhythm. They did not resort to tactical negativity to frustrate. They simply played their football. They trusted their principles. They executed their patterns. And those patterns were sufficient to claim a point at a stadium where points were once impossible to claim against the home side. This normalization of competitiveness at the Etihad represents a tectonic shift in English football's power structure. Shifts like this do not reverse easily. They tend to accelerate. Coming months will reveal whether Manchester City's leadership recognizes the severity of what is happening, whether they understand that this is not about one match or one season, whether they grasp that the infrastructure of dominance requires maintenance and eventually replacement. The easy paths to wait for injured players to return, to trust that quality will tell over time, to believe that the table will correct itself naturally. The harder paths to acknowledge that the project has entered a new phase, that difficult decisions are required, that the comfortable assumptions of recent years no longer apply. This match against Brighton was not a crisis. That would be dramatic overstatement, but it was a warning delivered by a club that represents the future of English football facing a club that represented its recent past. The future did not blink. The future stood its ground. The future left the Etihad with a result that confirmed its own belief in itself and undermined the belief of its opponent. Manchester City must now decide what to do with this warning. They can file it alongside other difficult results and hope for better days, or they can read it clearly, accept its message, and begin the difficult work of reinvention. History suggests they will choose the former for too long before being forced into the latter. But history can be defied. If any club has the resources and intelligence to defy it, Manchester City should be that club. The question is whether they have the will. Final verdict. Manchester City remain capable of individual brilliance, but this draw confirmed that the system which once guaranteed results regardless of opponent has degraded beyond the point where brilliance alone can compensate.